Welcome everyone to my first tutorial. In this first tutorial, I'm going to be making Tic Tac Toe using only DOM manipulations with JQuery. It's really simple, animated. This is the example. This is our final product. And as you can see, if we play through it and we get a winner, here X will be the winner. We get this little winner thing down here, and we can reset it just by hitting this button. Let's go ahead and get started. So since this is HTML and CSS, there's a lot of tedious stuff that I need to type. So for that, I'm just going to copy it in, but I will explain every line as I'm going through it, so you can still understand what is going on. You can either just pause it after I've copied it and type it in, or you can find the starter code on GitHub and all the code snippets that I'll use for this. So let's go ahead and get started. I've got my VS Code project open up here, but you can use any text editor. I'm going to create 3 files: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Index.html, style.css, and main.js. You can call these whatever you want, but if you want to copy my code exactly, you're going to need to call them the same thing. So in index.html, the HTML is actually quite short because the JavaScript is just interacting with the HTML. So I'm just going to copy it all in and then explain what's going on. So I'm going to get over here, and this is all the HTML for our project. In the header, we've got all this meta stuff that is not really important for this. It would be more important if you were making an actual web page, but it was in the boilerplate code, so I just kept it in. This line here is what imports JQuery, which we'll use in our JavaScript for the DOM manipulation. Then in this line, we import our style sheet, and here I'm actually going to change the title to Tic Tac Toe. That's just a little thing that will change the title in the tab to Tic Tac Toe. And then here's where all the magic is happening. So this is just an H1. That is this right here. And then we have this div called with a class of game area. And that is actually this whole div, this whole box right here, that contains the game board that you actually play the tic-tac-toe on, and the info bar that has the winner, the reset, and the turn. And so then here's the actual game board, and this contains 9 cells. The cells are just divs. You could do this with tables, but I'm doing it with CSS grid. So I'll show you when I get to the CSS. Each of these have their own grid column and grid row that gives them a certain position in the game board, which allows me to do that 3x3 grid for the tic-tac-toe board. And for the ID, you could give them more descriptive IDs, but I just needed an incremental ID, so I just used the first 9 letters of the alphabet. And then down here is that info div I talked about, and we have a button that is our reset button, and on click is this reset function that we will write in our JavaScript, then a paragraph element for the winner and a paragraph element for the turn. And it's defaulted to X's turn because in tic-tac-toe X starts. And then after that we have our script.j, our script tag, and that actually needs to be main.js. And this will import our script from everything we'll write in the JavaScript. It's pretty basic HTML, and that's all we're going to do for that. So then on the CSS, I'm going to start with the basics. Well, yeah. So I've got these two. This is just importing a font, and you don't have to use that font if you don't want to. You can use any font. We can just use the default fonts, but I like the way this font looked for it. It is this font right here, and down here. And then this is just a thing that goes in pretty much all CSS files. It sets the margin and the padding of the HTML and the body to 0, and then it sets the box sizing to border box. And then next, I'm going to do the game board and the game area. So for these, the game board, I want its width and height to be 500 pixels because I want it to be a square, and I found 500 to be a good size. Then display grid is what allows me to set those cells up in that 3x3 grid that I showed. And that is very useful for this because it makes it really easy to do that grid with just one line. Well, it's going to be more than one line, as you'll see in a second. And then we have the game area, which is around the game board. And I've set its width and height to fit content so that it will just be the smallest possible width and height so that there's no overflow with its content. And then I've set a padding of 50 pixels. You can set this to anything you want. You can have no padding if you want. I like it to have a little bit of padding. And then that box shadow right there is this right here. You can make this anything you want. It's not important. There's also many resources to generate box shadows how you would want them. That was just an aesthetic thing I decided. You don't have to put it in. That's the same with the border radius. That's just this right here. And then all of this stuff, this 4 lines of code, is for centering it. Position absolute makes it so it is absolute in relative to the top left corner of the screen. And so I set the position to 50%, 50%, which actually puts the top corner of the div right here in the center of the window. But we don't want the corner there, we want the center of it there. And this is what this transform does. It transforms it and moves the corner from here up to here, and that just centers it in the window. So then the next thing I'm going to do is actually do all the cells. So this is a lot, but it's pretty easy to understand. And I would recommend copying this in because it is very tedious to type. Okay, so we start with the cell class, and all of our divs in here have the cell class. This allows us to put a style onto all of them right away. I'm constraining their width and height to 170 pixels by setting a max width and a min width, and a max height and a min height. I could also set height and width, but that just prevents the JavaScript from making them bigger in the when we click on it, because we're going to be adding attributes to it that can make it bigger, but that code here prevents it from being bigger. And then this border width, it's not important, it just makes this border here thicker. You don't need it if you don't want it, but I just liked it. Then we have each ID. Now, I would really recommend copying and pasting this in because it's a lot to type and a lot to keep track of, but basically we're setting for each of these divs here, we are setting their position in the grid. This is at position 1, 1, this is at 2, 1, 3, 1. Then 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2. 1, 3, 2, 3, 3, 3. But then there's a few of these that we also have some border attributes to. Now this is to get that effect of lines going up and down. I could give a full border to every one of them, and that would cause it to be fully bordered, but that's not what a tic-tac-toe board usually looks like. It usually looks like this. So this border allows us to do that. We set the border right and left for the B and the H, and that is this one and this one. And what that does is it sets this border and this border and this border and this border. And then for the F and the D, we set border top and border bottom. That's this one, this one, this one, and this one. And then for E, which is the center, we just set the whole border. That sets this, 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 this. And that's all for the cells. We put them in their proper position, we give them their constrained width and height, and we set some borders. That's all we have to do for that. Then there's some extra stuff for the title that I'll copy in right here. You don't have to use this if you don't want the title to look like that. You can change the way the title looks. But what this does is this just moves the position of the text down a little bit so that it is not up against the top of the window. Then this sets the width to be all the way across the screen. And this makes it easy for me to center the text in the middle of the screen because the next line is text align center. So center the text along the width, vertical center. And since it's 100%, it's centered in the window. And then I just made the font really big, and this is where I used that font from up here. You don't have to use that font if you don't want to, but the line is right there if you want to use it. Next is for the info bar and everything in there. So the paragraph element and the button. So this for the button is mostly copied from W3 Schools, that website, on styling a button, and it just gives it this nice bordered style, and it also gives it that font. You don't need to use that if you don't want to, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Background color just sets the background. Color is actually setting the font color, so, and it's setting it to black. We make that border and we make it this dark brownish color. You can make it any color you want, but that's what I chose. Then I made some padding, and what this is left, right, top, bottom, or maybe it's top, right, bottom, left. But either way, what that does is it sets, yeah, it's left, top, right, bottom. And that sets padding here, 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 and here, so that the top is more put out. Because of the way padding works with the text, I wanted the text to be horizontally centered. Then next we have border radius, which just sets a little rounded border. The outline none just makes it so there's no outline when you click on the button. I don't like the way that looks, so I got rid of it. If you don't want to get rid of it, you don't have to. I set the height because the info bar uses display flex, which will mess with the height of the button, so you have to set it. You can make it taller or smaller if you want to. And then this position relative and top 10 pixels, what that does is it says make the position relative to where it's supposed to be, but then just move it however I tell it to. And saying top 10 just moves it down 10 pixels, which centers the bottom of the text. It aligns the bottom of this text with the bottom of that text, and it also aligns, makes the button centered into the div here. And then obviously I add the font. For the paragraph element, I'm adding the fonts, and then I'm just moving it down 2 pixels with this. It's probably not necessary. I could probably just move that down 8 pixels and that down 0 pixels. But this looks better in my opinion. It's a very, very subtle difference, but it looks better to me. Then in the info div, I made the margin top 50 pixels, which pushes it down away from the game board so it's not pressed right up against it. Display flex allows me to space the elements around. Like if I make a winner real quick, they're all spaced evenly. And display flex with justify content space around allows me to do that. And then I just have an inset border and I make it thick, and then I give it some border radius to give it that curved border, which I really like. And then I think, well, no. So I'm about to add in the CSS for the SVGs that we'll use for the X and the O's. The SVGs will come up in the JavaScript. I'll show you that. I'll go over that in a sec. But we're basically going to be adding SVG tags into our cells in order to get those X's and O's. But we need to give them some styles first. So we have first the circle. The circle is an SVG tag. You can put it inside, like it's a tag that goes inside of an SVG area, and it just makes a circle. And all that this does is it changes the stroke color. It makes the stroke line cap round, which is basically the end of the stroke. It rounds it off. We don't see the end of the stroke for very long, only during the animation. But it still looks good to have that stroke line cap round. This stroke dash array is what will be used for the animation, and it basically, instead of the stroke being one constant thing, it's 1,000 small strokes all the way around the circle. And we'll use that to animate it, drawing it. We'll just add those segments around the circle. The transform origin, 50%, 50%, that basically makes it so that if we transform it, it will transform from the center of it instead of from the top left corner. And then we need that because we're going to scale it down by 0.65 just to make it a little bit smaller so that it's not touching the ends of our thing. If it wasn't scaled down, the end of the circle would be touching the border right there, which doesn't look as good. So we just scale it down a little bit. And then this line is the animation for the drawing. And I'll show you the animation. It's down here. It's a really simple animation. And we do it for 0.65 seconds, and we're going to ease in out, which means it starts slow, gets faster, and stops slow. And forwards means maintain the end effect of the animation. So whatever is at the end of the animation, keep that. Now these three are for the X. This is for this path, and path.line are for the X. This sets the stroke dash array and the stroke dash offset to this, which is what allows for the animation. And then path.line, it sets the stroke dash offset to 1,000 so that we can start it at 1,000 here and have it go to 0 because we wanted it 0 for the end product, which is this. And then we animate dash for 0.65 seconds and ease in and out forwards. And then second, this is a class that is applied to one of the two lines that makes up the X. And what this does is it delays the animation on one of these lines so that they're both not drawn in at the same time. because that doesn't look right. It's you draw one line, then the next one. So we delay that animation with the second. And then the animation is really simple. At 0%, have the stroke dash offset at 1000. And then at 100%, make it 0. So basically, have the animation be at really tiny segments to one segment is the full thing. And that's all for the animation. So now let's get to the JavaScript, the meat of the game. So the first thing I'm going to do is these 4 lines. This is JQuery saying when the document is ready, run this setup function. Now we haven't declared that setup function yet, but we're going to. Tiles is a global variable we'll need for storing all of these tiles. It's more convenient than calling the jQuery function every time we need to use those tiles. And then in game over, it will, whenever a winner is found, it will make game over true and prevent the game from being played until you hit reset. Then I'm going to declare a little function here called index. What this does is it turns a 2-dimensional index into a 2D array, and it turns it into a index into a 1D array. We'll need this because the tiles array is 1-dimensional, but when we're looping over them, we're going to loop over them in a nested for loop, as if it was a grid. The next 2 lines are the SVG that we'll need for adding the elements in. Now, you can just copy this stuff in from the code snippets, but it's actually pretty simple. So we declare an SVG tag and we set its view box to 100 by 100, which is what I found to be best for the circle. We need to set the XML namespace, and this is the most common XML namespace. Then we create our circle. We tell it no fill. We tell it the center X position and the center Y position are 50, which is the center of those divs. We tell it to have a stroke width of 6 pixels and then a radius of 45 pixels. And then we end the circle and we end the SVG. It's simple. Then for the X, we declare SVG. I found this view box to be best for the X, and then we set our XML namespace. Then we have our 2 lines, which is 2 lines in the X. This first line is pretty standard. We give it a classes of path and line that we use for our animations. Here we tell it have no fill, and we set it stroke to this red color. We set it stroke width of 6, and we set our stroke line cap to be round. And the reason I did it this way is to show that you could do stroke line cap round in the element, or you could do it in the CSS. It's up to you. Then we set the X position and Y position of the line. So where does it start and where does it end? And then it's the same for the second line, except we add that second class which delays it. We still got no fill, same stroke width, stroke line cap round, and then we set the X positions, the Y, the X2, and the Y2. And then we're going to declare function setup. And setup is really simple. We're just going to set tiles to equal jQuery dot cell. This will tell jQuery to collect from the document all of these cells. And then we're going to actually do the game. this function that I'm about to copy in is the core of the game. It is JQuery cellClass.click. And what this does is it says if any of those divs are clicked, run this function. And what this function does is, first it checks, is the game over? If the game is not over, continue. Then it checks if the HTML inside that div is blank, then we can continue to set the HTML. So we set the HTML to either the O text, which is this, or the X text, which is this, based on what the player is. If the player is O, set it to O text. If it's X, set it to X text. Then we set the div's value to the player. We're going to use that for the checking win, see who won. And then we set the player to either X or O, depending on what it is. And then we say jQuery.turn, which grabs this paragraph element, and we set its HTML to the player, uppercase, just because it looks better, and then we say it's his turn. And if we have a winner, we will declare this winner function later. But if we have a winner, set the .winner paragraph element to set its HTML to winner, colon, and then the winner uppercase. And we set the game over to true because the game is over. We found a winner. Now next, we're going to write that reset function that we use in the button. And it is this. So first we set game over to false. We've reset the game. So game over is now false. And we'll set the player to X because X starts in Tic Tac Toe. Then we loop over all the tiles. And we've declared tiles up here as all the cells. First we set that tile to its jQuery object version. That way we can use the jQuery functions. We set its value to nothing and we set its HTML to nothing. Then we set the winner paragraph element to nothing, and we set the turn paragraph element to player's turn. What we could really do is just set this to X's turn because X always starts. It's really simple. We're actually going to be using this for loop a couple times because we need to get all the tiles, but we need to use them as their jQuery version, not as their direct DOM element version. We could use them as direct DOM elements, but it's a lot easier to use them as their jQuery versions. And in theory, if you've been following along, you now have something that works almost exactly the same as this. There's just one thing you're missing, and that is the winner function. So you've probably gotten an error because it doesn't recognize that winner function, but you should have this. Now we're going to write that winner function, and the winner function is the longest and most complicated part of this project because there's a lot of for loops and a lot of checking, but when you break it down, it's actually quite simple. So here it goes. To start for the winner function, we're going to need a helper function called getVals. And this getVals function, all it does is we have this little result array here. We're looping over all the tiles. We're getting the jQuery version and we're getting its value. And then we're returning that. It's really simple because it makes it a lot easier when dealing with all the tiles to just have their values, because their values are all we care about when we're checking the winner, because we set their values up in this click function to whoever clicked on them, no, actually here. We set their value to whoever clicked on them. So we need to check their values when we're checking the winner, because checking all this would be a nightmare. So for the winner function, I'm going to copy it in piece by piece. So first, the first few lines. Here we go. So this is what we have. We have function winner, and we've got this const board equals get vals. Now the board is what we're going to be using for checking the winner. We will check each one and see if it follows some criteria for being a winner. Next, we're going to do the first diagonal check. So we'll say first diagonal check. So we set a first variable. This is the first item we're checking. And we set a diagonal. And this is basically, is there a winner in this diagonal? And at first we set it to first is not equal to blank. Because if first is blank, then there is no winner, and just leave. We don't care. Then we're going to loop through I equals 0 to 3 incrementally. It's easy. Then we're going to check if the board at index, which is this index function we wrote up here, which converts two-dimensional index into one-dimensional. We check if index of I does not equal first. If index of I does not equal first, then we set the diagonal to false and we break out. And then if diagonal is true, we return first, because first should be either an X or an O if diagonal is true. And that's the first diagonal. Then we have the second diagonal. So second diagonal check. So we set our first variable. We're going to reset our first variable to index of 0, 2. And that is this right here. 0, 2. We're going to set a back diagonal. So is the backwards diagonal true? Is there a winner in the backwards diagonal? And first does not equal blank, because there needs to be something there for a winner. Then we're going to loop from I equals 1 to I equals 4. So from 1 to 4, but it's still 3 loops. And we're going to check if the index at I minus 1 and 3 minus I, this does, and it's the same logic for up here. Check if it's equal, if it's not equal to the first. If it's not, make diagonal false, make the back diagonal false. If the back diagonal is true, return first, because first should be either X or O. Then we need to check horizontal and vertical. So first and horizontal and vertical are basically the same. We're just going to flip the vertices. So we're going to say horizontal and vertical checks. So this is, I'm actually not sure if this is horizontal or vertical, but it's not really important which one it is, because they're both basically the same. What we do is we're looping over 3 times, because there's three horizontal and 3 vertical rows. And for each one of those rows, we set our first and we set our sideways. And then we loop over the 3 items in that row or column with ij. So I is equal to 3. We just go all the way down, all the way down, all the way down for each I and each j. And we check, but if sideways is true, return. Just return. We have a winner. There's no point in checking everything else. We already have a winner. We're done. And then it's basically the same for the other check, whether it's horizontal or vertical, which is again not super important. All that matters is that they're both there and they're pretty much identical. This is basically the same as this. All we're doing is we swap that J and the I, which swaps which way we're checking it. Just realized I made a vertical. This makes sure that there's a winner in the horizontal and the vertical. Then we need to check if it's a tie. And a tie occurs if there's no winner and every element, every cell is full. So we have our final return statement. Board.filter v to v equals blank means filter out all of the items that are equal to blank. And if there is no element that is not equal to blank, then it will filter out all the elements and the length will be equal to 0. So return tie. But if there's still something in there, just return undefined because we have no winner, and now we have it done. Now let's check. What I haven't been doing in this is I haven't been showing like what it should look like after every step. I probably shouldn't have done that. What I'll do is I'll make another video where after each copy and paste I show what it looks like so you can just see what it does. But I will show you the final product here. And as you can see, we have that title Tic Tac Toe, which is right here. And this is what we have. Doing stuff in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript has the unfortunate chance that you can copy in everything I do and still not have it look the same. If you have any of those issues, let me know, and I'll try to help you out in however way I can. One thing I will tell you is if you type Control-Shift-R, it will do a hard reload, which will clear your cache, which will, in most cases, solve your problems. If you still have problems, let me know, and I will try to help. But that's it. You now have this tic-tac-toe game. Wait, it's not working. Okay, so I made a small mistake in my code when I changed something. If you'll go back to where I was going over this function, I changed this to use ES6 syntax, and that doesn't actually work with JQuery. So you have to use the old syntax where you declare a function like this, because if you don't, this variable will not be correct. And so now if we open it in, I'm going to open it in live server. You may not have live server, but this should be our final product right here. And if we click, it works, it works, it works, it works, works. And if we check, X is the winner. It tells us that down here. We can reset and we can play more. And I'll show you something. If we get a winner, we're not going to get a winner here. So now X is the winner. Well, we have 2 open spots, but we can't click there because the game is over. So it doesn't let us click there. If we reset, now we can click because the game is no longer over. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you can understand it. Let me know what you thought about me just copying stuff in and then explaining it. It made it a lot easier for me, and it meant a lot less cuts of just me typing stuff in. But if it made it harder for you to understand, let me know, and I may even remake this video without copying stuff in. I may just type it all out for you. I hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.